Hello friends, my name's TheRealEmile and welcome back to Forza Motorsport 5. Now, we are continuing on with our Top Gear laps, and the theme this week is American cars. If you have not seen this before, it's very simple. I sent 6 cars this week around the Top Gear test track. They each get 6 laps. Their fastest lap is recorded and put onto our leaderboard. Once again, I'm not particularly the best at the Top Gear track. I do try my best with all these cars, but my times may differ to yours. Also, I drive with no assists off, save for the game operates the clutch for me because I haven't quite learnt manual and clutch yet. There we are. Our first car was the Corvette ZR1. I was kind of curious about this one. This starts around mid-A class, costs about 110,000 credits. I was kind of curious how this would compare to other A-class cars. We've had a hell of a lot, well, we've had quite a few A-class cars go around here. We're going to have a few more during this episode go around. I kind of wanted to see how this one would drive. Interestingly, this was a fairly nice car to drive actually. It has 640 horsepower and it's an American Corvette. I thought this would be power sliding everywhere, all the time. But no, it was relatively controlled. It did have a tendency to oversteer rather than understeer, although it does understeer a bit into the hammerhead. The brakes aren't quite as good as your modern supercars that you occasionally find in A-class. But it's actually a pretty good car to drive, this one. I didn't really have any major faults with this. It drove better than the Ferrari 458. In all honesty, it probably drove better than the McLaren MP4-12C that we had on the show last week. It was, yeah, this was a fairly good car to drive. I was a bit slow through that second to last corner, I do have to admit. Like I said, the brakes aren't the best on this car, but other than that, all in all, pretty good car to drive. So since we sent the C6 round, I figured we'd send the brand new Corvette round. This is the C7 Stingray. This has a lot less power than the ZR1. This only has about 405 horsepower, I think. Oh, 455, sorry. It is quite a good looking car, this as well. I do quite like the new C7 Corvette. Now, I wasn't expecting this to be much fast. Well, I wasn't expecting this to be faster than the ZR1, but I kind of wanted to see how it would compare. Through the corners, I've got to say this wasn't as nice as the ZR1. It's strange as well, because this car almost looks European. It almost looks, well, it still looks American, but it looks like it's much more European influenced. It looks like it can take corners a hell of a lot better than the old one can. It probably can in reality, but in Forza, I prefer driving the ZR1. I've got to be honest. This was a bit more tail happy than the ZR1, but I did manage to keep it in check on this lap. Fairly decent car to drive, no real complaints. It is just in A-class. It's 605 PI, I believe this runs at, so yeah, some parts aren't quite as good as other A-class cars. The brakes, again, are a little bit vague on this. They're not quite up to par, but yeah, all in all, it wasn't a terrible car to drive. It only cost 65,000 credits as well. That is great value for money for what that car is. Now we come on to the Ford GT. I wasn't quite sure what to expect of this car. When Top Gear test drove this with the Ferrari 430 and the Pagani Huayra, Clarkson said it was probably the worst handling of all of them. However, he bought one because there was no better Ferrari at the time, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this car. It wasn't very good. This car's almost a decade old now. I threw this around because we're getting the 2016 Ford GT in Forza Motorsport 6. And yeah, this just wasn't that good. It felt a bit wallowy. The suspension was fairly soft on this, which I was quite surprised at. The brakes aren't very good, and the handling isn't very good. It does drive better than the 458, don't get me wrong, but then again, it feels a lot more heavy than the 458. This car does feel heavy, which is strange. I believe this is about the same PI as the C7, however this costs 140,000 credits. You just go with the C7. Honestly, the C7 was a lot better to drive than this Ford GT, but yeah, I mean, I'm a bit disappointed about that. Now, this is a car that I knew was going to handle like anus. This is the Shelby GT500 Mustang. This is the top of B class, and it has more power than the ZR1 you saw going around. In fact, I believe this has the most power of every single car here today. And it's a B class car, and I believe, just looking at the window, yeah, this is the lowest class we had today. Yeah, this was an interesting one to drive. As you can imagine, if you put your foot down, it will go slideways very heavily. But once you got it under control, it was okay-ish. It was nowhere near as bad as the Hennessy Venom, but you have to be so cautious out of all the bends. It was, to be fair, it wasn't slow. Down these straights, it was picking up a serious amount of speed. This has more power than the 458, and it can do 205 miles an hour, which, considering it doesn't look very aerodynamical, that's, yeah, it's quick. Don't get me wrong, it's very quick in a straight line, and yeah, I wasn't expecting great things of this, but it did a bit better than I was expecting, to be honest with you. I'd much rather have the Camaro ZR1. Now, here's a car a lot of you have probably overlooked in this game. This is a Saleen S7. Yeah, I'm sure a few of you don't even recognise this car. This actually is a fairly interesting one. This is built by Saleen. It's almost an American hypercar. This is the Hennessy Venom before the Hennessy Venom existed. This has, I believe, as stock about 550 horsepower. It can do 230 miles an hour, which is an awful lot. And this car, I've got to be honest, it handles fantastically. Honest, this is a very good handling car. It's yeah, definitely the best thing I drove today. Not the most surprising, but definitely the best I drove. It's very quick. It looks pretty good as well. Through the corners, that was almost flat out. I felt I could take that flat out. I tried to avoid it just because each time I did, I went into the tyre wall, but it definitely felt like it could take that. I'm sure a driver with a bit more skill than me could probably get that around flat out. Yeah, this was an extremely good car to drive. I do recommend you checking this one out. I can't quite remember how much it is, but yeah, it was very good. And finally, we have the Lexus LFA. Now, this is an interesting one. I wanted to try this out purely because it's the same PI as the Corvette. And, oh, a quick thing as well. Technically, yes, I know this isn't an American car as such. It has a Lexus badge on it. Lexus comes from America. Therefore, I am classing it as an American car. However, I am well aware it's sort of Toyota's pet project. Yeah, this was not great to drive, I've got to be honest. The engine in this is absolutely superb. It's such a fast revving engine. It's a great engine. The problem with that is if you put your foot down in this, you will just go sideways and fly out and spin and all sorts of other nasty bad things. But it was interesting. I drove this back in Forza 4. It's nowhere near as bad as I remember it. In Forza 4, I remember it was extremely slidey, but in this, it wasn't as bad. It was okay. It costs a hell of a lot more than it's actually worth. This costs 340,000 credits. It's actually, yeah, it is the most expensive car we have here today. And will it be the fastest? Well, we'll have to wait and see. On to the lap times now, and the fastest car of today is the Saleen S7 with a 1:17.254. For a car most of you've never heard of, that is extremely good. It's almost faster than an MP4-12C, and that was extremely quick round here for an A-class car. Yeah, that was extremely quick round here. The Corvette ZR1 finds itself in 10th place, only a couple of milliseconds off of a Ferrari 458. I almost wanted the Corvette to beat the 458, it just couldn't do it, unfortunately. It was very close though, but yeah, the Corvette's definitely one to buy out of them too. The Lexus LFA is marginally behind the Corvette with a 1:28.15. The Ford GT goes into 12th place with a rather disappointing 1:21. At least someone finally got a 1:21. Usually cars sort of sit at the 1:20s or 1:22s, but yeah, the Ford wasn't great round here. The C7 Stingray finds itself at a 122.037, which is a bit better than I was expecting it to. I was almost expecting the ZR1 to be a bit faster, but it wasn't, so that was good. Shelby GT500 at 123.068, marginally slower than the ZR1. I guarantee you in the real world the ZR1 is much quicker than that Shelby. The Shelby, it takes a lot more work than the ZR1, so the ZR1's the car I would personally buy. Anyway, that's all of the Top Gear laps for today. I do realise there's a lot more American cars in Forza 5, so tell me your favourites and tell me if you want to see them go around the track, and I'll be sure to throw them round at some point. But anyway, friends, my name's been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.